On this episode of Doin The Most, we're going to make homemade mustard. Now, I do need to warn you, this isn't a super quick process. It's going to take a full night of soaking and a day of labor, so make sure that you have time to invest into your homemade mustard before you get started. For the ingredients, they're pretty straightforward, though not always easy to find. For your liquid ingredient, you can either use 1.5 cups of water, or we used 1.5 cups of white wine. The recipe traditionally uses white wine, but if you're looking to avoid that alcohol, it's fine to use water. 6 tablespoons of some kind of mustard seeds. We chose to use half and half yellow mustard seeds and brown mustard seeds. Brown mustard seeds are a little bit milder. The darker your mustard seed gets, the more mild the flavor, and yellow mustard seeds are hotter. 3 tablespoons of white wine vinegar, 2 tablespoons of dry mustard powder, ground mustard, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 2 teaspoons of salt, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1/8 teaspoon for ground turmeric. We searched at our local grocery stores for mustard seed and had some difficulty finding it, so we actually ended up going to the Savory Spice Shop, which is a local spice shop in Oklahoma City, and it was the first time we'd been in, and it was a really good time. They were very helpful, pointed us right to the mustard seed and gave us the choice of brown versus yellow, and we actually weighed out equal amounts of both of them so that we would have a more complex flavor. We actually ended up getting our turmeric here too because we were there and we needed some. So your first step is to measure out your ingredients. So it is 1.5 cups of whatever liquid you're using, whether it's that water or your white wine. And then combine your dry ingredients. So 3 tablespoons of yellow mustard seeds for us, which ended up being pretty close to the entire amount that we bought. And then 3 tablespoons of brown mustard seeds. Like I said, we chose to do half and half because we wanted some more complexity in flavor and visual interest in our mustard. You could do all brown, you could do all yellow. There's actually black mustard seeds too. It's totally up to you. And then your 2 tablespoons of dry mustard. I was struggling to open it here. A tablespoon of onion powder, which we were running pretty low on onion powder, so I think I ended up just dumping basically. The recipe actually calls for half a teaspoon of garlic powder, and I, in a rush, put a whole tablespoon in, and you know what, it turns out okay. 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1/8 teaspoon of turmeric. So add your liquid to your dry ingredients, which was your 1.5 cups of either dry white wine or water, and 3 tablespoons of white wine vinegar. And stir it all up so it's well combined, and then you just need to let it sit overnight. So we covered ours in plastic wrap. And came back the next morning to finish. So the next morning, we're stirring it up just to kind of see what the consistency has become and adding it to the blender. And this is where the process gets kind of involved. So your first step is to blend all of these ingredients until they are really well combined. Honestly, our blender is not very good, and so I did my best to combine them as thoroughly as possible. But I think that it could have been blended a little bit more. The good news is the next 2 steps in the process really make sure that everything's pretty homogeneous in texture once you get it done. So your next step is to cook it over the stove. And you're not cooking it super long. You are bringing it to a simmer over medium-low heat and stirring until it's slightly thickened, only for about 3 to 5 minutes. So this isn't a really long process, but I was amazed just how mustard-like it became when we blended it, and then how it thickened even more over the stovetop. So once you've cooked it and it's thickened just a little bit, strain it through. We used a mesh strainer. Obviously you can figure out and use whatever you have on hand, but the goal is, again, to make it as smooth as possible. It's pretty chunky right now. It's still far more combined than I expected it to be just from blending it and cooking it for a little bit. But this is to really give it as smooth a texture as possible. So arguably you could skip this step. And PC actually was happy to eat the chunky mustard, but I wanted to make it as smooth as possible. So this is the part that was really time intensive and took probably an hour, honestly, of time of just scraping it through the mesh to try to get as much out as possible. We ended up putting it on the stand because it was easier to work with, and I had to scrape both the top and bottom to get it all combined. But as you can see, by the time we got to the end, there was not very much solid left, and we had a pretty creamy, smooth mustard that I thought was really pretty. I put it in a jar just like we do everything these days, and put it in our fridge. It is recommended that you wait 5 days to try it. This was very hot mustard. We were both surprised and overwhelmed by how strong the flavor is, but within 5 days it was still hot, but it had mellowed a lot in flavor, and the flavor had deepened in complexity. So that's how you make homemade mustard. Just like everything else, feel free to sub in and out ingredients and make it your own. Thanks for stopping in.